Welcome to COIQ, where you learn how health innovators maximize their success. I'm your host, Dr. Roxie, founder of Legacy DNA and international best-selling author of How Health Innovators Maximize Market Success. Through candid conversations with health innovators, early adopters, and influencers, you'll learn how to bring your innovation from idea to startup to market domination. And now, let's jump into the latest episode of COIQ. Welcome back, COIQ listeners. On today's episode, I have Jorge Sanchez with me. He is the co-founder and chief medical officer for Sentinel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here, Dr. Roxie.
So, Jorge, before we get started into our interview questions, go ahead and give our listeners and viewers a little bit about your background and what you guys have been innovating lately.
Great. I am internal medicine trained. I'm a doctor, actually a hospitalist. It's a doctor that specializes in being in the hospital. And I am co-founder, met Nirav Shah, our CEO, about 3 years ago. And we talking about remote patient monitoring and making it clinically feasible and actually change the outcomes in our patients. And the story he told me is he keeps seeing patients that were coming with blood pressure that was uncontrolled. They're coming with strokes. He discharged. They come back with worse strokes, and their blood pressure was still unmanaged. So we thought of this idea of remotely managing hypertensive patients to reduce their risk of stroke and heart attacks. And I initially didn't believe in it, and we did a study in our rehab facility, and the data was so compelling that I had to join him in this vision of delivering remote patient care. And then we said, hey, we got to do a company. And then the next question is like, how the heck we pay for it? And then I got introduced to the world of entrepreneurship, and it's been a wild ride since then. And here we are talking about remote patient monitoring in the COVID area, which has totally changed the landscape.
Yeah, and we'll definitely dig into that today. So when did you start the company? 3 years ago?
Yeah, late 2017.
Okay.
We did late 2017.
And where are you in the innovation process now?
So it's funny. Innovation is a word that's thrown around quite a lot. So for innovation for us is, it's either technology, a process, a new way of looking at things. And I think actually we know is that we definitely took a stand in innovating in processes and in technology. There's this concept of barriers to access to healthcare, and I think there's a new word, which is technological barriers to healthcare. And healthcare traditionally, technology is not really accepted with a warm, fuzzy feeling, because healthcare, the community as a whole, is very much into evidence-based and a traditional model of validating any products, any ideas, because we're applying this to human beings, and our oath is not to harm people. So before you have a product or process touch a patient, there has to be a very long period of validation and checks and balances to make sure that you're not harming anybody, and that you're also doing some good that's measurable and quantifiable. So what we believe in is that healthcare, because of the distrust of technology, it's very hard to enter that space of healthcare. So if you're a tech company, to get validation is very difficult. You have to do pilots, you have to trials, you have to publish. And so what we did is we took a shot at getting our data, and we submitted it to American Heart Association, and it was peer reviewed, it was accepted. I presented it at San Francisco at American Heart, and it was very, very, very well received. And the moment we got that pilot under our belt and the validation and data before it's just funny, when we talked to customers, which in this case were clinics, it just helped us, it gave us momentum. So the innovation is in managing hypertension at 10x faster than standard of care through algorithms and mobile health. And basically, patients get a device. The device connects to our app, which is a mobile, either Android or iOS. The data goes to the cloud, and then what the unique thing is that we have algorithms and data analysis that isolates the patient, and then we have care team that we train to talk to the patients monthly to coach them, track them, and if there's any anomalous measurements, they actually get called real time. And by the way, this all happens real time. The data is not siloed. The data doesn't get put away. We have about 300,000 blood pressure measurements, over 1,500 patients on the platform. We're doing a longitudinal tracking. So the patients, 2017 till today is maybe 2.5 years of data on patients. So the other innovation is, can we make the data meaningful so that a doctor can actually do something about it rather than it just shows up in his EMR or his phone and guide him to do something. So the goal is the innovation. Innovation is not enough. You got to change something. You got to save money, scale, and help the patient. And we wanted to do is those three things. And what we've done is we just published, again, another study in the American Heart Association is going to be presented in September. And we've lowered the blood pressure, average blood pressure of our groups by about 4 millimeters of mercury. The classes of hypertension, very severe to mild, have shifted towards mild, which means that our patients are getting healthier from a blood pressure point of view. And then the innovation is that our care team, the challenge in healthcare is that one doctor, one provider, one patient. You got to kind of change that ratio, and we're trying to change that ratio where our care team can manage several hundred patients through the technology that we give them, through the platform, through the devices.
So I want to go back to something that you said around the clinical validation and the piloting. From your perspective, has that changed because of COVID? So prior to COVID, I've had guests on the show and we would talk a lot about, death by pilot, getting stuck in pilot purgatory, and, all the best practices around getting that data and that clinical efficacy and validation that's needed to really be able to successfully commercialize an innovation in healthcare. And then since COVID, where does that leave us with these pilots? Have they stopped? Are they are new pilots happening? Has that impacted that type of process for you?
The answer is yes. It definitely has changed the way pilots roll out. But for us, it was an opportunity, right? Every obstacle is an opportunity to show how good you are. So what the challenge for us was that because we have to enroll patients in the pilot, we have to have someone in our team go in the clinic and give the patient the blood pressure cuff and the device and train them and educate them and show them the app. That takes time, and you have to do it in person. And because of COVID, these clinics are obviously afraid of having these strangers coming in and having a patient come in just for a device in an area where they're potentially exposed. So we had to solve that. And we did virtual onboarding. So we solved traditional onboarding and went to virtual onboarding where the cuff gets shipped to the patient. We call them virtually. We help them. We educate them on how to do the cuff, train them on the cuff use, download the app, enroll them in the app, give them all the permissions. All that has to be done virtually. So we had to solve a lot of inherent friction points where if someone isn't usually in front of you and grabs your cell phone and downloads something for you, like how do you do the same part of virtually? And our population is over 60. There's a cohort that technology has really not been very nice to them. So our chief technology officer is amazing. He's very forward thinking. He's made this stuff work for this population. It's not technically challenged. No one has designed workflows for them. Mm-hmm. So because the way we do it, we're able to successfully onboard 65, 70, 75, 80-year-old patients onto the platform. And I think that is the challenge. So for pilots, in the sense of COVID, is you got to do the pilot and remove that risk of exposure. And if you do that, then the customer is not going to be so hesitant. So
I think that's really important, because I've talked to people that have actually put it on hold and are kind of waiting for, COVID to be done in order to kind of pick up maybe hopefully where they left off. And so, I don't think this is a term that I coined by any means, but I talk a lot about innovation being birthed in chaos, right? In these most crisis moments, we can see some of our biggest creativity. And so I would imagine that if you didn't have this limitation, you probably would have relied on the physical face-to-face model for a long time. Because of the crisis, your team got creative on how they could solve this, and it could ultimately end up providing a much better experience and much more scalable.
Totally. And that's the beauty of this, is that where some people would have thrown their hands up, we really sat there, and our engineers and our CTO just sat there and they just buckled down and they solved it. And we're doing good. I mean, we're growing. Our growth hasn't been impeded by COVID. We had a pause, but it hasn't been impeded because of this virtual enrollment. And the other part is, you ask a point, when there's a crisis, or what I call hair on fire, if you have your hair on fire, if you're the guy bringing water, you're going to get attention. So it's also timing, because if we were too small and not had the money to be able to, or to learn, or the knowledge to be able to do this, and this happened, we would have been dead in the water. So we're a little bit further along. Yeah. The other part is that we realized the pain points and we solved the problems that when we talk to the customer, any objections they have, we're already kind of 2 steps ahead of them. That's a key part.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that for all leaders, no matter what you're doing, our resilience is being tested in completely different ways than we have before. So, where are you today? What are some of the newest, latest, exciting things that are happening for your company today? And then I think I also, kind of want to, on top of that, has COVID not only not hindered you or, been an impediment, but has it also been an accelerator for you?
That's interesting. COVID is just an opportunity for us, because remote patient monitoring existed before COVID. It wasn't really on the forefront of our customers, who are clinics and hospital systems. But when COVID came along, we threw this app into the wild, and the app got a lot of attention. And then we wanted to build an ecosystem and not just be an app designer and it just goes out. We wanted to build an ecosystem. So our app connects to our platform that has the data, and the data loops around to some provider in an organized way. And it's all decentralized, delocalized. So when we went to COVID and we partnered with, for example, Dell Medical at Austin to do their contact tracing, it wasn't just the app that tracks the patient, that asks the symptoms. The things that I'm pretty sure other people are doing is that we built contact tracing support on the back end, so that the contact tracers, when they get this data and track it, they can have someone to follow, and it makes sense in its organized way. So it's not just the app, it's how the data goes into the platform and the dashboard, so that when there's a person working on it, it makes a workflow that is just fast and like butter, and it just makes it easy to use. We worked really hard with Dell. We customized it, and we definitely, we have over 6,000 patients on that platform that it's ongoing. And then what do we learn from that is that you can't make a one-off product. You have to build your product that's a core product that can be a tool like a Lego that can connect into different problems. And if you presented the product as a COVID solution, people are very cynical. But if we presented it as remote patient monitoring, traditional remote patient monitoring, or physiologic monitoring in the context of COVID, it makes more sense. It kind of makes logical sense. You have patients that are COVID, they're about to get it, they're at risk, as you know, higher risk of cardiovascular events. So therefore, monitoring is totally appropriate, totally matches it, and people get it. But yet, at the end of the day, we were always doing remote patient monitoring. It didn't appear like we just came on the scene and invented remote patient monitoring for COVID. We're doing it for diet. We were doing it for heart failure. We're doing it for hypertension. We're doing it for a bunch of other things. So I think that's the key point here, that just have a good core product and a good service, and everything will follow. People will look for it.
Hey, it's Dr. Roxie here with a quick break from the conversation. Are you trying to figure out what moves you need to make to survive and thrive in the new COVID economy? I want every health innovator to find their most viable and profitable pivot strategy, which is why I created the COVID Proof Your Business Pivot Kit. The Pivot Kit is a step-by-step framework that helps you find your best pivot strategy. It walks you through 6 categories you need to examine for a 360-degree view of your business. I call them the 6 critical pivot lenses. As you make your way through this comprehensive kit, you'll be armed with the tools, tips, and strategies you need to make sure you can pivot with speed without missing out on critical details and opportunities. Learn more at legacy-dna.com/kit. I think that what you just described is a dilemma, a crossroads that a lot of health innovators have found themselves amidst this crisis. Is I had a really viable solution prior to COVID. It has a use case for COVID, but do I change my positioning strategy or my messaging strategy? How do I do that around COVID to make sure that I don't seem exactly like you said? So I don't seem like I'm just this new company on the scene. But I also don't miss any opportunity for these specific new use cases that have come since the pandemic. What were some of those considerations that you all made?
Got it. So what we did is we did testing, we threw it under a wall, and looked at the response to it. We didn't pivot. We were not ready to pivot. We don't consider a pivot. So I think that if your company, if your you're talking about making a pivot to COVID-19, that's a big commitment. Mm-hmm. We predict COVID will be around, but in what form we don't know, and that's a pretty big risk for a company to make a pivot like that. I think that if you stay the course and you micro pivot, that's far safer than if you make a total, because you're abandoning. Think about it. You're a 2-year. Let's say hypothetically, you're a 2-year startup. You're almost abandoning 1.5 years of work for something that is there. By the way, everybody's jumping on a solution for COVID, right? Everybody gets email. Yeah. If you're in healthcare, you get emails that are like, hey, what's going to happen post-COVID? What's your COVID-19 solution, right? It's becoming a rubber stamp on everything. So now, do you want to be the company that is adding to the noise out there, right? The only way you're going to get signal is you have to show a product market fit. And the only way you're going to show that is you have to have a core product that has a proven history of success in the past. Because as you know, in healthcare, these are not emotional decisions. These are very logical. There's more stakeholders. There's more people involved. Your product has to be scrutinized by more people. If let's say it's a clinic, it's not the doctors only. It's got to be the practice manager. It's got to be the biller. It's got to be, everybody's got a stake in it. Even the patients have to have a stake in it. If you're in a hospital system, the CIO has to have a say in it. The IT department has to say in it. Legal has to have a say in it. The unit economics have to make sense. So if you're going to pivot, you're totally taking your, like my CEO Nirav says, it's like, we're making a 7-layer cake. You're throwing all those layers out, and now you're making brand new layers. You better have a good foundation, and that's just it's not a good way to go.
Yeah.
Now, if you're failing and you're drowning in the weeds, and then you're that route, then maybe that's the viable way to go. But I don't think that is the way to go. If you have a stable, or you're making money, or you're growing slowly, I wouldn't pivot to COVID.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's a one size fits all. I think every organization, I think the ones that are probably best suited for the pivot, that they would have been best suited for the pivot prior to COVID. That they just, right, they didn't have a viable market strategy. And the pandemic just illuminates that more so than maybe they were paying attention to before. Yeah,
totally. And I think that when you're in the weeds and you're in the mud fighting, it's hard to get an assessment of yourself as a company when you got all this noise around you. Like what kind of, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of company are we? Are we a service? Are we tech? Are we IT? Are we delivering? What exactly are we doing? And then once you identify yourself, then like how you're branding it, and then the brand becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You just can't, like you say in your book that I read, it's like you can't be a logo. It's how unique you make your company in the context of the market, so that you stand apart from everybody else, right? If everybody else logos are orange and you change it to purple, it's not going to make a difference.
Right.
But if everybody is serving one community and they're serving everybody, then maybe it's time for you to serve one specific niche rather than everyone else. You can't look like everyone else. And that's and it's weird because, like, are you changing because of your competition, or are you changing because of your vision? And I think that's where, for me, the founding team or the core team is so key, which I'm very proud of my company because our team is just amazing. And I think that is why we're just still surviving and perseverating and flourishing in the middle of COVID. Because if the team has a vision and the vision is there, you can relay it to your customers, to your patients, to your teams, to everyone you touch. It becomes part of your DNA, and in there, the brand flourishes. Our CEO, Nira, his superpower is that he relays his vision, and he can communicate that vision very clearly. And that, to me, is a key superpower that unique CEOs have to have for the company to move forward. You can have a spectacular product, but if your CEO can't relay that vision in the context of the ecosystem you're creating, because you could either be, so my thing is, if you're a small company, you're going to be low in the ecosystem. All right, fine. But if you're low in the ecosystem, you're at the mercy of everybody above you. But how you get to the top is you have to relay a vision that you are creating a new ecosystem and that you want to be at the top of that. And then now you're rocking and rolling, because now everybody will follow you and everybody will see it, and you'll partner better. You have more alliances. People will see that they can interact with you better, benefit from you, which is what we're doing. We have partnerships with different companies, partnership with universities, doing research, all because our vision of our product, of our service, is that we're providing an end-to-end solution for remote patient monitoring that is not just focused on the service, it's focused on the technology, it's focused on the liquidity of data, it's focusing on the patient adherence, it's focusing on outcomes, it's focusing on agility, it's focusing on scalability and cost. When you put all those together, you better have a good story to do that. Otherwise, you're just going to fall flat on your face when you can't execute.
So speaking of that, I love when folks like you come on the show that are open to being so candid and transparent about the realities of this journey, right? So it's not just rainbows and butterflies every step of the way, and just win. So what are, for the viewers and listeners that are hearing your story, what are some of the challenges that you either have faced during COVID or that you're facing today, so that they might be learn from that or be inspired by it?
Right. I think the biggest challenge is because now we're delocalized and we don't have face-to-face. The quality of communication has to be superb. Before we used to fly, meet, and talk, and now we have to do face-to-face. And, some of it's done while you're driving, while you're shopping in the supermarket and you're pushing the cart and your daughter's jumping around you and, grabbing and opening stuff up. So because of COVID, real life encroaches on your job. Because there's no barriers, right? It's like, I can't lock a door and keep my daughter out, and I wouldn't want that. So I think the biggest challenge is to keep your team, have the vision, relay that vision, and keep your team motivated. Yeah. So that they see the vision also, and they're excited about what you have. Also, this thing about remote monitoring, remote employment, it's not what it's cut out to be. People say, hey, it's a great gig, but they don't realize that you don't know when your day starts, you don't know when your day ends. There's a lot of gray area. The job satisfaction go down. You're in front of a computer. You're talking all day. You're more meetings. You just gotta relay that to your team that remote work, you're not being measured by the hours that you put in. It's by the quality of your work. So it's just a different metric and a different mindset. And I think that if you're not a company, if you're a company that in the COVID is you have a delocalized team, like I say, you have to talk to them differently. You have to motivate them differently. You have to talk to them more often. And at the end of the day, you got to refresh the vision, because you could feel like you're not. My company is over 50 people are working in our company. It's our headcount. If you're by yourself calling patients every day and you don't talk to anybody, you feel lonely. You feel like you're not part of a bigger team. Yeah. So the challenge is, how do you got to make your people feel like they're part of a very large idea, even though they're at home by themselves with nobody to talk to socially. And I think that is the key thing that we keep working at.
Yeah, I think that there's so besides the additional resilience that's required, I think that there are different tools that have to be in the leadership toolbox in order to be an effective virtual leader, because it's not the same tool set. So can you think of any, just really tangible examples of how you are leading a virtual team differently than you maybe would have done in the face-to-face environment? Anything that's working well to kind of cultivate that relationship long distance?
The definite button that or lever that we're pushing is we work the team. We make sure that the team leaders understand and we all work together and we communicate together. So if the team gels and the team understands the problems and solve it, then I won't have to jump in and micromanage it or get involved. So I think the team, the cohesiveness of the team, the unity of the team, everybody marching shoulder to shoulder to the same goal is very key. And then everything else aligned with that. So when we get on phone calls, my focus with problems is not what the actual problem is I look around the virtual room, if you want to call it, and look at how my team is solving it. And then my focus is, hey, have you tried this or that to solve this problem? Not to, hey, I want you to call A, B, and C. I try not to do that, because then the person doesn't feel validated. They don't feel like they're part of the solution. And then the next time a similar problem comes up, they won't be able to solve it. It'll just
be calling you again, emailing you again.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That empowerment is really important. So as you think about your journey for the last 3 years, what decisions do you think that you all have made that have just been game changers for you to get you to the level of success that you're at today?
Well, it's so weird. It's actually a lot of little decisions that back then didn't seem like little, and now it's like, wow, man, that was a good decision.
Yeah.
You know, and I tell my CEO, well, we were lucky. And he says, no, we weren't lucky. We just had enough data and we connected the dots the right way. And I think the decision that we have made is to opt for the vision and stick to our vision rather than let other people convince us otherwise. I've been kicked out of, I'm over in Miami. Me and Nirav, my CEO, when we first started, we were kicked out of cardiology. We were kicked out of rooms because they couldn't believe that stroke patients could use a phone app. We were convinced that doesn't make sense. It doesn't. Yeah. Older people do use the phones. They do it. The point is we stuck to it. And then some investors would tell us like, hey, you need to pivot to this. You need to pivot. This is what the market shows and this and that. And you just get so many confounders that at the end of the day, someone tells you to go north and no one tells you to go south and no one to the west and east. At the end of the day, I talked to my CEO and we're like, dude, what is the vision? Like, are we going to do remote patient monitoring the way we're going to do it, the way we envision it, which is we listen, but we speak. That's why we picked the name Sentinel. We listen, the data, we also manage, and we come out and manage and take the risk of managing patients. And we stuck to it. And people tell like, that's very risky. There's a lot of liability. And at the end of the day, you just have to stick to your vision and make it a reality. And that's the magical bubble that you have to have. You have to be so convincing that it's a possibility. The possibility is not a possibility. It's a reality. And I think that is the decision that it's just basically the attitude. And no, we're going to do remote patient monitoring this way. This is the way we believe it. This is the way that it should work. And stick to it and have the vision but have evidence to back of your vision. Right? The difference between a vision and a hallucination is it's very thin line of a vision and hallucination. So
that's exactly where I was going next, Jorge, is there's this fine line for entrepreneurs between investors and cardiology teams, who are kicking me out and they're saying you're crazy and that won't work. And I'm being stubborn in my vision because I know it will and it can. And then also where the flip side of that is, listening to advice and hearing what the data and being able to recognize that maybe my original vision or idea is not going to lead me to product market fit. And how are you dancing around those two parallel paths where one leads to success and the other one leads to failure?
Totally. No, totally. I mean, we could have pivoted and mean, we committed to small clinics, because they were the early adopters, and that helped us validate the idea. But the early adopters also wasn't financially viable for other reasons. So now the early adopters who validated us, now we allowed us to go to the middle adopters, and now we're approaching the late adopters. So you got to have data, and you got to look at it objectively and look at your company, and be ready. In a way, are you ready to kill your baby to make it fly, right? Like, this idea that you have, if you really believe in it, you have to be willing to take the risk and let it die so that you can validate it. Because if you don't have, and I've been to a lot of incubators, here's what I see a lot. I see people who are tech, they have an idea. It's a beautiful idea in their head. They have the technology. They're in love with the technology. Oh, I have this membrane that does magical properties. I have this device that does this. I have this app that does this in your face and this and that. Beautiful. But can you make that now in healthcare, in the context of healthcare, can you address an illness? Can you change the outcome of the illness, and can you lower the cost? And that is the part that everybody forgets. So you have these engineers come up with these beautiful ideas that become orphans.
Yeah.
No, I saw a company that gave us this device that goes around your neck. It's a beautiful device, but you can't, it doesn't work. It doesn't apply. There's no applicable clinical scenario that it would change the outcome. So I think that we're in love with technology, but your product market fit has to solve a problem that's measurable, palpable, and affects and touches everybody. The patient has to benefit, the doctor has to benefit, your company has to benefit, society has to benefit. And if you don't start with that and then do the technology second, you're going to create a product that does, it buzzes and whizzes, but doesn't really change anything. So,
and it ends up in what I call the zombie graveyard.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap up here, do you have any lessons learned that you would want to share with our viewers and listeners?
Lessons learned. Number one, pilots. You shouldn't call them pilots. I think a pilot puts you in a position where you're doing work for free and your customer is not really convinced. We stopped doing pilots because we were getting stuck in the expectations were managed. So do a controlled rollout. So the idea is do a pilot with the condition that if the pilot succeeds and there's metrics, they're going to sign on the dot and you're going to grow into a customer. But if you do a pilot with unclear metrics, unclear goals, and they're not going to sign then that partner, that's not a pilot. It's not going to help you. You're going to waste money and resources, and you're going to have nothing to show for it. So that's number one. Number two is don't worry too much about branding at the beginning. The branding will come naturally if you make all the right decisions. If you reach the early adopters, they'll be your brand. They'll brand for you, because if you get the early adopters and you target for the early adopters and you make things easy for them and they sign up for you, now they become a case study that you can show the middle adopters and the late adopters. The late adopters are the guys who are not taking risks, right? It's like a bullfight. The early adopters are up in the stands. They want to see what they can do, and if they see it safe, they're going to go into the bull ring with you. The early adopters are the guys in the ring with you. They're taking the risk, but you're also taking risk, and you gotta mitigate that risk as best you can, because they know that they're taking risk and they know you're early adopter. So I think that if you take a strategy, early adopters, focus on them, you'll do much better and you'll survive along the way. And then on a day-to-day basis, being an entrepreneur is not what it's cut out to be. It's not as glamorous as people make. I talk to my team. I'm on the phone, hours a day, multiple. Some are 30 seconds, some are 45 minutes long. It can be very exhausting. There's a lot of failure. There's a lot of small failures that can make you very despondent. And I think that the only you can do is walk away with a sense that you learned something from that and change the attitude, change the way you see things, stay with your vision, communicate with your team. We have two models in my company. Is number one is we eat failure for breakfast, and the last one is I keep telling everybody is we're going to see America one patient at a time. Those are the models that we do.
Wait. I think we've got some noise going on. I didn't get a chance to hear that. If you want to repeat that.
Is that coming? Is that me or you?
I think that's you.
It stopped. So.
All right. Do you want to repeat that? You eat failure. You eat failure for breakfast.
So we have these sayings, and whenever we have something, Nirav always tells me, "Hey, we eat failure for breakfast." So by lunchtime, we just have to get over it and move on and have a plan. In the morning, we always talk about our failures and what happened, didn't happen. And then by lunchtime, I walk around the backyard and look at the sky, and I'm like, yeah, that's it. There's a mistake we made. We learned. Let's move on and let's get back on the horse and do it.
Yeah.
And then the other one is I say this to everybody, every customer, every patient, every doctor that I speak to is like, hey, we're saving America one patient at a time.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta have an end goal, and the goal is you gotta do something that is going to help society, and that you're doing something to help people.
Change the world.
If you start with that, you're always going to feel good. If you start with I got to make money, you're not going to do good because your rewards are not going to match the work that you do.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. So thank you so much, Jorge, for joining me on the show today. How do our listeners and viewers get a hold of you if they want to follow up with you after?
Great. My email is very easy. It's Sentinel. Actually, it's Jorge, Jorge, at sentinel.healthcare, sentinel.healthcare. Go to our website, and we're easy to find.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hey, much appreciated. Stay healthy. You have a good one.
Great. Thank you so much for listening. I know you're busy working to bring your life-changing innovation to market, and I value your time and your attention. To save time and get the latest episodes on your mobile device automatically, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone who's been sharing the show with friends and colleagues. See you on the next episode of COIQ.